There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They are doorways that look like every other door on a long, familiar hallway, and it's only when you look back, years later, that you realize you were standing on a threshold. You see that the air was shimmering with a choice you didn't even know you were making, a choice that would reroute the entire architecture of your future. For me, that moment was a Tuesday night in late October. It was nothing more than the sight of an open door at the end of our apartment's narrow hall, a simple rectangle of warm, yellow light cutting through the cool, blue dimness. Caleb's door, and I was just standing there, my hand resting on the cool metal of my own doorknob, paralyzed by the simple, silent invitation of it. It wasn't the first time he'd left it open. It had become a kind of unspoken ritual over the past few months, a signal fire lit across the small distance of our shared space. But that night, the silence felt different. It was heavier, freighted with the accumulated weight of all the nights that had come before it. The open door was no longer a question. It was starting to feel like a statement, a plea. And as I stood there, I felt the full, crushing gravity of what had been building between us, a tide that had been pulling me out from the safety of the shore for so long I hadn't even realized I could no longer touch the bottom. The story of that open door isn't a story about a single night. It's a story about the slow, terrifying, and beautiful erosion of the walls I had built around myself, and the unexpected current that was Caleb, pulling them down one grain of sand at a time. It began, as most important things do, long before I ever understood what was happening. I met Caleb Hale in the echoing, chlorinated cathedral of the university natatorium. It was a place of jarring sounds and profound silence. The shriek of the coach's whistle, the explosive splash of a dozen bodies hitting the water, the roar of the crowd during a meet. It all existed in a space that could, in an instant, fall into the deep, submerged quiet of the water itself. I was a diver, which made me something of an outlier on a team dominated by swimmers. Our disciplines were different. They were about endurance and relentless forward motion, a battle against the clock fought horizontally. Mine was about a brief, violent burst of power followed by a moment of suspended grace, a vertical conversation with gravity. While they churned the water into a frothing chaos, I sought to enter it with the least disturbance possible, a knife slicing through silk. We were two different species sharing the same habitat. My role on the team was twofold. I competed, yes, but my truer passion, the one that hummed beneath my skin with a more persistent energy, was photography. I was the unofficial official team photographer, a title I'd earned by simply showing up to everything with my old 35mm camera and a bag full of film. I captured the in-between moments, the exhausted slump of a swimmer on the block after a grueling set, the shared, weary smile between two guys in adjacent lanes, the way the low winter light would stream through the high windows and turn the water's surface into a sheet of shattered diamonds. I was an observer by nature, more comfortable behind the lens than in front of it. It gave me a reason to be present but detached, a part of the whole, but with a built-in boundary. The camera was my shield and my excuse. Caleb was impossible not to notice. He was the sun around which the rest of the team orbited. He wasn't just good, he was sublime. Watching him swim the 200-meter freestyle was like watching a force of nature. He had a powerful, elegant stroke that seemed to pull the water toward him, propelling him forward with an efficiency that bordered on mystical. He was all long limbs and coiled muscle, and in the water, he was pure, fluid grace. Out of it, he was quieter than you'd expect. He had a bright, easy smile that he deployed often, a kind of social armor that made him seem accessible and friendly to everyone. But I saw the other side of him through my lens. I saw the tension in his jaw before a big race, the far-off look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching, the way he would sometimes retreat into himself in the middle of a loud, celebratory team dinner. There was a current of profound loneliness running beneath his sunny exterior, and as a fellow practitioner of quiet solitude, I recognized it instantly. Our friendship didn't happen with a bang. It was a slow dissolve, like sugar in hot water. It started with nods across the pool deck, then brief conversations in the locker room about a shared class. We discovered we were both majoring in disciplines that required a lot of solitary work. He in software engineering, me in fine art photography. We were both night owls, prone to long, draining sessions of focus, his spent in front of a screen of scrolling code, mine in the silent, chemical-scented darkness of the darkroom. We started studying together in the cavernous, mostly empty library late at night. We'd claim a big table in a forgotten corner, our books and laptops spreading out to create a small island of light and industry. We rarely spoke for hours at a time, but the silence was never uncomfortable. It was a shared, companionable quiet, the hum of two engines working in parallel. It was during those late nights that I felt the first, faint stirrings of something more than friendship. I would look up from my contact sheets and watch him, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. I'd study the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the unconscious habit he had of chewing on the inside of his cheek, the way a stray lock of his dark, perpetually damp hair would fall across his forehead. These were the details no one else seemed to see, the small, unguarded moments that my camera and my heart were so drawn to. A dangerous warmth would spread through my chest, a feeling I recognized with a familiar, sinking dread. I was good at being a friend. I was not good at navigating the treacherous territory that lay beyond it. My last relationship had fizzled out from a lack of genuine connection, a polite performance of affection that left me feeling more alone than when I was by myself. I had retreated into the safety of my own shell, and I was terrified of anything that threatened to crack it. So I packed the feeling away. I filed it under Do Not Touch, a box of fragile, dangerous things I kept in the attic of my mind. Caleb had a girlfriend, Sarah, a bright, bubbly girl from the volleyball team. They were the campus golden couple, and their relationship seemed as effortless and perfect as his swimming. He was my friend, my best friend, as the months turned into years. He was the one I called after a disastrous dive, the one who would show up at my darkroom door with coffee and a bagel when I'd been printing for 12 hours straight. He was the one who saw my photographs not just as pictures of the team, but as portraits of people, and he understood what I was trying to capture without me ever having to explain it. Our friendship was a rare and precious thing, a quiet harbor in the often stormy sea of university life. And I would not be the one to wreck it on the rocks of my own stupid, impossible feelings. I kept the box locked. I kept the lens cap on. I was the quiet observer, and that was a role I knew how to play. I would just have to learn to live with the ache that came with it. The shift, when it came, wasn't a sudden earthquake, but a slow, tectonic slide. It began in our senior year, with the gradual erosion of Caleb and Sarah's seemingly perfect union. There was no big fight, no dramatic betrayal. It was a death by 1,000 small cuts, a slow cooling of what was once a bonfire. I saw it in pieces, through the viewfinder of our friendship. I saw it in the way he stopped talking about her with that easy, proprietary pride. I saw it in the increasing frequency of his solo appearances at team functions, his vague excuses for her absence. He started spending more and more of those late nights in the library with me, the silence between us now holding a new kind of weight. It was no longer just the comfortable quiet of shared focus. It was tinged with his unspoken sadness, a melancholy that seemed to seep into the air around him. One night, long after midnight, he finally broke the silence. He pushed his laptop away with a sigh that seemed to come from the very core of his being. I think it's over, he said, his voice quiet and rough. He didn't look at me. He just stared at his own reflection in the dark screen. I didn't ask for details. I just nodded. I'm sorry, man. It's just, he started, then trailed off, shaking his head. We're just different people now. We want different things. It feels like we're both just going through the motions because it's easier than stopping. He finally turned to look at me, and in his eyes, I saw not just the sadness of a breakup, but a profound and terrifying loneliness. The kind of loneliness that comes from realizing you've been performing a version of yourself for so long. You're not sure who you are without the script. He, the sun, had lost his planet, and he was just drifting in the cold, empty space. That night was the catalyst. It was the crack in the dam. After the official end with Sarah, a quiet and civilized affair that seemed to leave him more hollowed out than a messy fight would have. He began to lean on me in a new way. Our friendship had always been a sturdy structure, but now he was testing its weight-bearing capacity. He'd call me late at night, his voice thick with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He wasn't sleeping well. The big, empty bed in his apartment felt, he admitted, like an ocean he was drowning in. The quiet he once shared with Sarah was now a vast, echoing silence that amplified his own restless thoughts. So he started seeking refuge in my small, cluttered apartment off campus. At first, it was just for talks. He'd show up at my door around 10, looking lost and frayed around the edges. We'd sit on my lumpy, second-hand couch, and he'd talk, or not talk, for hours. I'd make him tea, and we'd just exist in the same space. The low light of my living room a small pocket of warmth against the dark night. I became his anchor, his quiet harbor. And I was so focused on being the good friend, the steady presence he needed, that I didn't see the lines we were beginning to blur. I didn't see that in his search for comfort, he was beginning to pull me into the very current I had fought so hard to resist. The ritual began subtly, as all habits do. It started with him falling asleep on that lumpy couch. One night, after a particularly long and rambling conversation that touched on everything from the pressure of graduation to the frightening emptiness of the future, I looked over and he was gone. Not gone from the room, but gone from the conversation. His head was tipped back against the cushions, his mouth slightly open, his breathing deep and even. He looked younger, more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. A wave of profound tenderness washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. I watched him for a long time, the rise and fall of his chest, the way his long eyelashes rested against his cheek. My camera was on the coffee table, and the urge to pick it up, to capture this fragile, unguarded moment, was almost overwhelming. But I didn't. This felt too private, too sacred to be framed and captured. It was a secret just for me. I found a blanket in my closet and draped it over him, my fingers brushing against his shoulder for a fraction of a second too long. The contact sent a jolt through me, a spark in the dry tinder of my carefully suppressed feelings. I retreated to my room, my heart hammering against my ribs, and lay awake for hours, listening to the sound of his breathing from the other room. It was the beginning of a new, dangerous kind of music in my life. He started falling asleep on my couch a few nights a week. It became a given. He'd come over, we'd talk, and eventually, his words would slow, his eyelids would grow heavy, and he'd drift off. The first few times, he was apologetic in the morning, embarrassed. "Sorry, man, I crashed again," he'd say, running a hand through his messy hair. "It's fine," I'd reply, trying to sound casual, as if my entire nervous system hadn't been on high alert all night. "You needed the sleep." Soon, the apologies stopped. It was just what happened. Then, one night, about a month into this new routine, he shifted on the couch with a groan. "Leo," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Your couch is a torture device. My back is killing me." I was standing in the doorway of my kitchen, holding 2 mugs of water. My heart did a slow, painful lurch. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in the air, a change in barometric pressure before a storm. "It's a free couch," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You get what you pay for." He pushed himself up, wincing. "Your bed is big enough for 2 people, right?" There it was. The question, hanging in the air between us, disguised as a practical solution. It wasn't a proposition. It wasn't a confession. It was just a question about logistics, about comfort, about his sore back. And yet, it felt like the most loaded question I had ever been asked. My mind raced, searching for an excuse, a way to deflect, a way to keep the line between our spaces intact. But looking at his tired, shadowed face, the genuine discomfort in his eyes, I couldn't do it. How could I deny my best friend a comfortable place to sleep when he was so clearly adrift? How could I prioritize my own secret, selfish fear over his real, immediate need? "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's big enough." That was the first night. The first time the boundary of my bedroom door was breached. It felt like a monumental event, a seismic shift in the landscape of our friendship, but the reality of it was almost comically mundane. He brushed his teeth using the spare toothbrush I kept for guests. He borrowed a t-shirt to sleep in. We got into the bed from opposite sides, the wide queen-sized mattress feeling like a vast, empty desert between us. We lay on our backs, staring at the ceiling, the silence stretching taut. "Thanks, Leo," he said into the darkness. "Seriously, it's no problem," I lied. It was a huge problem. My entire body was a live wire. I was acutely aware of every inch of space between us, of the heat radiating from his body, of the faint, clean scent of his skin and my laundry detergent on the shirt he was wearing. I lay perfectly still, my muscles clenched, terrified that if I moved, if I even breathed too loudly, I would betray the frantic chaos of my inner world. Eventually, his breathing evened out, deepening into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. Only then did I allow myself to relax, just a fraction. I turned my head on the pillow and looked at him. The moonlight coming through the window cast a soft glow on his face, smoothing out the lines of worry and exhaustion. He looked peaceful, safe, and a devastating thought bloomed in my chest. This was what I wanted. Not just this one night, born of necessity and a bad couch. I wanted this feeling of closeness, this quiet intimacy, this simple, profound act of sharing a space through the dark and vulnerable hours of the night. It was a terrifying realization, because it meant the box I had locked my feelings in wasn't just unlocked. It had been thrown wide open. The ritual solidified after graduation. We decided to get an apartment together. It made sense on every level. We were both starting new jobs in the city, him at a fast-paced tech startup, me as a freelance photographer, piecing together gigs and assisting a well-known portrait artist. We were comfortable with each other's habits. We were best friends, and it was cheaper. It was the most logical decision in the world. But beneath the logic, a different current was flowing. Our new apartment was a two-bedroom, a railroad-style layout where you had to walk through the living room to get to the narrow hallway that connected our rooms and the single bathroom. My room was at the end of the hall. His was the one just before it. The pretense of the bad couch was gone, but the need for proximity remained. The first week in the new place, he slept in his own room. The silence in the apartment was different from the silence of my old one. It was a hollow, lonely sound. I found myself lying awake, listening for a sound from his room that never came. I missed the simple, comforting weight of his presence. On the fifth night, I heard his door creak open. Footsteps in the hall. A soft knock on my door. My heart leaped into my throat. Yeah. The door opened a crack. His silhouette was framed in the dim light from the hallway. "Can't sleep," he said, his voice small. "Mind if I—" He didn't have to finish the sentence. I shifted over, pulling back the comforter on the other side of the bed. "Come on." He slipped into the room and closed the door behind him, plunging us into a deeper darkness. The bed dipped as he got in. He didn't offer an excuse this time. There was no sore back, no lingering conversation. It was a direct, unspoken admission of need. He lay down, and the space between us felt both smaller and more charged than ever before. For a long time, we were just two still forms in the dark. Then, I felt a tentative movement. His hand, finding mine under the covers. He didn't intertwine our fingers. He just laid his hand over the back of mine, his palm warm and heavy. A simple, grounding point of contact. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. His touch said everything. It said, "I'm here. I'm lonely. Stay with me." And my stillness, my acceptance of his touch, said, "I will." That night, the ritual was cemented in its new form. There was no more pretense. It was an act of mutual comfort, a quiet agreement forged in the loneliness of the night. But it was still a house of cards, built on a foundation of plausible deniability. We never spoke of it in the daylight. In the morning, we would be roommates again. We'd make coffee, talk about work, argue about whose turn it was to take out the trash. The intimacy of the night would recede like the tide, leaving behind only a faint, salty residue in the air, a memory that we both tacitly agreed to ignore. It was a fragile, maddening truce. The cuddling started just as slowly, just as deniably. It began with him, always him, the unknowing initiator. He was a restless sleeper, and in the depths of the night, he would shift and turn, his body naturally seeking warmth and contact. The first time his arm came to rest around my waist, I stopped breathing. I lay there, rigid as a board, my mind screaming. He's asleep. He doesn't know what he's doing. Don't move. Don't make it weird. His breath was warm on the back of my neck. His body was a solid, comforting weight against my back. It was everything I had ever secretly wanted, and it was a form of exquisite torture. I was a starving man being offered a feast, but told I could not eat. Night after night, this became our silent dance. He would get into bed. We would lie separately for a while, and then, in the deep velvet of the night, he would move. He would roll over, his arm draping over me, his leg tangling with mine. He would pull me closer, his body fitting against mine as if they were two pieces of a puzzle designed to connect. Sometimes, he would bury his face in the space between my shoulder blades, his soft breaths puffing against my skin. And I would lie there, awake for hours, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, caught between the sheer, blissful pleasure of his closeness and the paralyzing fear of what it meant. Was this just the reflex of a lonely man seeking physical comfort, the most convenient source of which happened to be me? Or was it something more? Was his subconscious acting out a desire that his conscious mind refused to acknowledge? I became a detective of the dark, an analyst of sleeping gestures. I studied the pressure of his hand, the rhythm of his breathing, the subtle shifts in his body. I searched for clues, for evidence that would support the case my heart so desperately wanted to build. But there was never any proof. In the morning, he would wake up, stretch, and move away, untangling himself from me with the casualness of someone pushing aside a pillow. He never mentioned it. He never gave any sign that he remembered the way he had held me all night. And so, I was left in a state of perpetual, agonizing uncertainty. Then came the era of the open door. After a few weeks of the late-night knock, the knock itself disappeared. Instead, he would just leave his bedroom door ajar when he went to bed. A few inches at first, then wider, until it was fully open. It was a silent, standing invitation. The choice was now mine. The ritual had evolved. It was no longer about him coming to me, seeking refuge. It was about me choosing to go to him. The first time I saw his door open like that, I stood in the hallway for a full 10 minutes, my own doorknob cold in my sweating palm. My room was my fortress, my safe space. To leave it, to walk down that short hallway and cross the threshold into his room, felt like a monumental surrender. It felt like admitting that I needed this as much as he did. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a new level of complicity. I couldn't pretend this was just something that happened anymore. I was making a choice. I was an active participant. I took a deep breath, let go of my doorknob, and walked the 10 feet to his room. I slipped inside, closing the door softly behind me. He was already in bed, on his side, facing the door, as if he were waiting. His eyes were closed, but I wasn't sure if he was truly asleep. I got into the bed, and the mattress dipped. He didn't stir. I lay on my back, my usual starting position, and waited. After a few minutes, he rolled over, not with the restless energy of a shifting sleeper, but with a slow, deliberate motion. He moved flush against my back, his arm wrapping around my chest, his hand coming to rest over my heart. He pulled me in close, his chin hooking over my shoulder. And he sighed, a deep, contented sound that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. In that moment, I knew. He wasn't asleep. He was wide awake. And so was I. We lay like that for what felt like an eternity, in a silence that was no longer about denial, but about a shared, unspoken truth. The air was thick with it. My heart was beating a wild, frantic rhythm beneath his hand, and I knew he could feel it. I knew he could feel the tremor that ran through me. This was no longer about comfort or loneliness. This was something else. This was a new room we had entered together, a room where the old rules no longer applied. But it was a room without a light switch, and we were still fumbling in the dark, terrified to say the first word, terrified to break the spell. The weight of his hand on my chest felt like both an anchor and a crushing burden. It held me there, but it also pinned me down with the terrifying, beautiful possibility of what it all meant. And I had no idea what to do next. The crossing happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. The kind of relentless, soul-dampening rain that makes the city feel like it's slowly dissolving. I'd spent the day in the studio, assisting on a shoot that had gone on for hours, and I came home soaked and bone-tired. Caleb was already there, sitting on the couch in the dark, the only light coming from the blue-gray glow of the city through the big living room window. He wasn't on his laptop or watching TV. He was just sitting, staring out at the rain-streaked glass. The apartment was quiet except for the steady drumming of the rain and the distant hum of traffic. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. He turned his head slowly. Hey, his face was all shadows, his expression unreadable. There was a palpable tension in the room, a static charge that made the hairs on my arms stand up. This felt different from our usual evening quiet. This was not a comfortable silence. I dropped my wet bag by the door and went into the kitchen to make tea, the familiar ritual a small anchor in the suddenly strange atmosphere. When I came back with 2 mugs, he was still in the same position. I handed him one and sat on the other end of the couch. We drank in silence for a few minutes, the clink of our mugs the only sound. "Bad day?" I finally asked. He shook his head, but it was a slow, uncertain gesture. "Not bad. Just the long. A lot of meetings. A lot of people." He took a sip of tea. "I think I'm just tired of talking." I understood that completely. There were days when the sheer effort of interacting with the world felt like a physical weight. "I get it," I said. We sat for a while longer. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows. The night deepened outside. Normally, this would be the point where we drifted into our separate rooms, where the unspoken question of his open door would begin to hang in the hallway. But tonight, neither of us moved. The tension on the couch was a string pulled taut between us. It felt like we were waiting for something, a script we hadn't been given. Eventually, he set his empty mug on the coffee table with a soft clink. He didn't lean back. He turned his body to face me, his knee brushing against mine. The contact was electric. "Leo," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. It was the same way he had said my name that first night in my bed, but this time his eyes were open, and they were fixed on me with a terrifying intensity. "Yeah." My own voice was thin, reedy. My heart had begun its familiar, frantic drumming. He just looked at me for a long moment, his gaze searching my face as if he were trying to read a difficult text. I saw a universe of emotions swirling in his eyes: confusion, fear, exhaustion, and something else, something softer and more vulnerable that I couldn't name. It looked like a plea. "Are you okay with this?" he asked, his voice cracking on the last word. "With what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. My entire body knew. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us, at the apartment, at the whole fragile ecosystem we had built. "Me. In your bed." Holding on, he couldn't quite bring himself to say the word cuddling. It was too intimate, too specific. "I know we don't talk about it, but I need to know if it's okay." My throat felt tight. Here it was. A crack of light in the dark room. An acknowledgement. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't just seeking warmth. He was aware. It was the moment I had been both dreading and longing for. The end of plausible deniability. My answer would change everything. I could lie. I could say it was fine, just a friend thing, and we could retreat to the safety of that lie. We could keep playing our silent game. Or I could tell the truth. I took a breath. "It's okay, Caleb." My voice was steadier now. "It's more than okay." Relief washed over his face, so potent it was like watching a clenched fist slowly unfurl. But it was followed quickly by another wave of fear, of uncertainty. He broke eye contact, looking down at his hands, which were clasped tightly in his lap. "I don't know what I'm doing, Leo," he whispered to his knuckles. "I'm so confused. After Sarah, I just felt so disconnected from everything. And being with you, in the quiet, it's the only time I feel anchored. The only time I don't feel like I'm about to float away." He looked back up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Is that crazy?" "No," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "It's not crazy." He moved then, closing the small distance between us on the couch. He didn't touch me, not yet. He just sat there, inches away, our knees pressed together, our shoulders almost touching. The air between us was vibrating. He was so close I could see the faint constellation of freckles across his nose, the individual lashes framing his dark, troubled eyes. "Leo," he whispered, and his voice was raw with a vulnerability I had never heard from him before. It was the voice of a man standing on the edge of a cliff, terrified of the fall, but more terrified of staying where he was. He hesitated. The silence stretched for a heartbeat, 2, 3. It was the longest silence of my life. "Would it be okay," he began, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain, "if I kissed you?" And there it was. Not a demand, not an assumption. A question, a request for permission. It was the most terrifying, most beautiful question anyone had ever asked me. In that one question, he was handing me all the power. He was laying himself bare, offering up his confusion and his tentative, burgeoning desire, and trusting me not to shatter them. I didn't answer with words. I couldn't. The word yes felt too small for the moment. Instead, I just leaned forward, closing the final inch between us. My hand came up, not out of thought but out of pure instinct, and cupped the side of his face. His skin was warm, his cheek rough with the stubble of the day. He leaned into my touch, a small, shuddering breath escaping his lips. And then I pressed my mouth to his. It was not a passionate kiss. It was not hungry or demanding. It was tentative. It was soft. It was a question and an answer all at once. It was the taste of tea and rain and salt from the tears that had, I realized, begun to slide down his face. It was a kiss that felt like a confession, a surrender. It was the quiet, final click of a lock turning, of a door swinging open onto a room I had only ever dreamed of entering. We stayed like that for a long moment, our lips just resting against each other, breathing each other in. It wasn't about desire as much as it was about recognition. It was the feeling of coming home to a place you didn't even know you'd been searching for. When we finally pulled apart, we just rested our foreheads together, our eyes closed. The static tension in the room was gone, replaced by a profound, trembling peace. The crossing had been made. We were on the other side. But as we stood there, on the shore of this new, uncharted territory, I had no idea about the storm that was waiting for us just over the horizon. The morning after was brutal. It was like waking up from a beautiful, vivid dream into a world that had turned gray and sharp-edged. The soft, rain-soaked intimacy of the night before had evaporated with the dawn, leaving behind a harsh, awkward silence. I woke up first, alone in my bed. For a panicked moment, I thought I had imagined it all, that the confession and the kiss had been a desperate fantasy cooked up by my own yearning. But then I saw his mug still on the coffee table next to mine, and the memory came rushing back, real and undeniable. I got up and went into the living room. He wasn't there. His bedroom door, for the first time in months, was firmly closed. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. The closed door felt like a slap in the face. It was a barrier, a retraction, a statement as clear and loud as any words he could have spoken. I made coffee, my movements stiff and automatic, the familiar ritual offering no comfort. I heard his door open, and I held my breath. He walked into the kitchen, not looking at me. He was already dressed for work. "Hey," he muttered, heading straight for the coffee pot. "Morning," I said, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. He poured a mug, his back to me. The silence was excruciating. This wasn't our comfortable, companionable quiet. This was a charged, hostile void. He was radiating a kind of panicked energy, a desperate need to be anywhere but here, with me. He took a gulp of coffee, winced as it burned his tongue, and then moved towards the door. "I'm gonna be late," he said, still not meeting my eyes. "Big project deadline. Probably be a late 1 inch. "Caleb," I started, but he was already grabbing his bag, his keys, his everything but me. "Talk later." He threw over his shoulder, and then he was gone. The front door clicked shut behind him, and the silence he left in his wake was deafening. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the warmth from my own mug doing nothing to chase away the chill that had settled deep inside me. He had fled. He had run from what happened between us, from me. The beautiful, terrifying vulnerability of the night before had been replaced by a morning of pure, unadulterated fear. And I was left alone with the wreckage, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Caleb became a ghost in our own apartment. He left before I woke up and came home long after I had gone to bed, claiming impossibly long hours at work. The few times we did cross paths, he was a stranger. He was polite, distant, his eyes sliding past me as if I were a piece of furniture he was trying to avoid bumping into. He answered my questions with monosyllabic grunts. The open, easy friendship we had built over years had been shattered, and in its place was this brittle, agonizing politeness. His bedroom door remained closed. Every night, the sight of that flat, wooden plane was a fresh wound. I was a mess. My mind became a torture chamber of self-recrimination. I had misread everything. I had taken his loneliness, his confusion, and I had twisted it into something it wasn't. The kiss hadn't been a confession, it had been a mistake, an anomaly, a moment of weakness for him that I had greedily pounced on. I had been a convenience, a warm body to cling to in the dark, and the moment the lights came on, he saw his mistake and was horrified by it. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until it felt hard to breathe. I had not only lost the possibility of something more, but I had irrevocably broken the most important friendship I had ever had. The quiet observer had finally acted, and in doing so, had destroyed the very thing he had been observing. After nearly a week of this silent, cold war, I couldn't take it anymore. The pain of the silence was worse than any painful truth he could tell me. I needed to know. I needed to hear it from him, even if it destroyed me. I needed the wound to be cauterized, even if it meant a scar. That night, I didn't go to bed. I waited for him. I sat on the couch in the dark, just as he had done the night of the kiss, and I waited. It was almost 2 a.m. when I heard his key in the lock. The door opened, and he stepped inside, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He stopped dead when he saw me sitting there, a dark shape on the couch. "Leo," he said, his voice wary. "You're still up. We need to talk." "Caleb," I said. My voice was quiet, but it held a firmness that surprised even me. This wasn't a request. He let out a long, weary sigh and dropped his bag by the door. He didn't come to the couch. He leaned against the wall by the entryway, keeping his distance. "I'm really tired," he said, a weak attempt at deflection. "I don't care," I said, the raw hurt finally breaking through my carefully constructed composure. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to kiss me and then pretend I don't exist. You don't get to break our friendship into a million pieces and then just walk away without a word." He flinched as if I had struck him. He ran a hand over his face, his whole body thrumming with a nervous, cornered energy. "Leo, What was it, Caleb?" I pushed, my voice rising slightly. "What was last Tuesday? Was it a mistake? Were you just lonely? Was I just convenient? Just tell me. Whatever it is, just be honest. I can take it, but I can't take this. This silence. This disappearing act. It's killing me." He finally looked at me then, and his face was a mask of pure misery. He looked lost, young, and terrified. "I don't know," he whispered, and his voice was ragged with despair. "God, Leo, I don't know." He pushed himself off the wall and began to pace the small area of the living room, a caged animal. "I come in here, and I see you, and I panic. Every time I look at you, I remember, and I can't." "You can't what?" I asked, my voice softer now, the anger draining away, replaced by the familiar ache of watching him suffer. "I can't breathe," he burst out, his voice cracking. He stopped pacing and faced me, his hands twisting together. "All my life, I've had a map. You know? Swim this race, get this grade, date this girl, get this job. It was all laid out. I knew who I was. I was Caleb Hale, the swimmer, Sarah's boyfriend, the straight guy. It was easy. And then everything fell apart. And you were there. You were the only thing that felt solid. The only thing that made sense." He took a shaky breath. "And that night on the couch, when I asked if I could kiss you, It was the first thing I had done in years that wasn't on the map. It was the first honest choice I think I've ever made. And it felt right. More right than anything has ever felt. His voice dropped to a whisper again. And that scares the hell out of me. He sank down onto the floor, his back against the couch, and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders started to shake with silent, racking sobs. Who am I, Leo? He choked out from behind his hands. If I'm the guy who wants to kiss his best friend, who the hell am I? My heart broke for him. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, not from my own pain, but from his. All this time, I had been so wrapped up in my own fear of rejection, my own hurt, that I hadn't truly seen his. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. He was running from a truth so seismic it threatened to demolish the entire structure of his identity. I slid off the couch and onto the floor beside him. I didn't touch him. I just sat there, a quiet presence in the dark, giving him the space to fall apart. After a long time, his sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. He slowly lowered his hands, his face pale and tear-streaked in the dim light. "You're Caleb," I said softly. "You're my best friend. You're the guy who works too hard and worries too much and feels things so deeply he doesn't know what to do with them. You're the guy who has a terrible habit of chewing on his cheek when he's concentrating. You're the guy who made me feel less alone long before any of this happened." I finally reached out and laid my hand on his knee. His muscles were tense beneath my touch. "Whatever that kiss meant, whoever it makes you, it doesn't change any of that. It doesn't erase you." He looked at me, his eyes wide and lost in the dark. "But I hurt you," he whispered. "I ran. I was a coward." "Yeah, you did," I admitted, my voice gentle. "And yeah, you were. But I think I get it now." We sat in silence for a long time, the honesty hanging in the air between us, fragile but real. The storm had broken. The aftermath was messy and uncertain, but the destructive pressure was gone. He hadn't denied the feeling. He had confirmed it. He had just been terrified of it. And that, I realized, was something we could work with. It wasn't an ending. It was a new, terrifying, and hopeful beginning. The resolution didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeped in slowly, like morning light through a curtain. That night of confession on the living room floor was not a magic fix. It was the start of a conversation, one that we continued in hushed tones over the following days and weeks. We talked. For the first time, we truly talked, not just about work or the weather, but about the delicate, intricate thing that had grown between us in the dark. He spoke of his fear, the disorienting feeling of his own emotional landscape shifting beneath his feet, revealing desires he never knew he possessed. He confessed that my friendship was the most stable thing in his life, and his terror of losing it was what had made him run. I, in turn, finally let him see behind my own carefully constructed walls. I told him about the years of quiet, suppressed affection, about the ache of watching him from behind my camera lens, about the agonizing joy and terror of our nightly ritual. I admitted that his withdrawal had felt like a confirmation of my deepest fear, that I was unlovable, that my feelings were a burden. Laying our respective fears bare was like lancing a wound. It was painful and messy, but it was the only way to let the healing begin. We were two men who had been escaping the ghosts of past relationships. His a public performance of love, mine a private landscape of loneliness, and we had, without realizing it, stumbled into each other's arms as a refuge. Now, we had to decide if this refuge could become a home. We took it slowly. We were rebuilding from the foundations up, and we were careful with every brick. The first step was reestablishing touch, but this time with intention and consent. A few days after our big talk, we were watching a movie on the couch, a careful foot of space between us. The old tension was gone, replaced by a new, tentative shyness. Halfway through, Caleb cleared his throat. "Can I?" he started, gesturing to the space beside me. "Can I sit closer?" My heart swelled. It was another question, another offering of vulnerability. "Yeah," I said, my voice soft. "Of course." He moved closer, and the warmth of his side against mine was a profound comfort. After a moment, he hesitantly reached for my hand. I met him halfway, our fingers lacing together on the cushion between us. It was a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. It wasn't a product of sleepy denial or unspoken need. It was a choice, made in the light, with our eyes wide open. We held hands for the rest of the movie, the silent contact a steady, reassuring pulse between us. The sleeping arrangement evolved, too. For a while, we returned to our separate rooms. The closed doors no longer felt like a rejection, but like a necessary reset, a way to give each other space to breathe. Then one night, I found myself lying awake, the silence of my room feeling empty again. I got up, went to his door, and knocked softly. He opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting. "Hey," he said, a small, hopeful smile on his face. "Can't sleep," I said, echoing his own words from weeks before. He didn't have to answer. He just stepped back, holding the door open for me, and I walked in. That night, when he pulled me close, it was different. There was no hesitation, no pretense of sleep. He wrapped his arms around me, and I settled back against him, my own hand coming up to rest over his on my chest. It was a conscious, mutual embrace. "Is this okay?" he whispered into my hair, his voice filled with a genuine desire to be sure. "It's perfect," I whispered back. And it was. It was the peace I had been craving, the safety of being held by choice, not by accident. The first kiss after our reconciliation happened in the kitchen. It was a Saturday morning. I was making coffee, and he came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. He just held me for a moment, watching me scoop the grounds into the filter. The domesticity of it, the simple, easy intimacy, was breathtaking. I leaned my head back against his, my eyes fluttering shut. "Morning," he murmured against my temple. "Morning," I replied. I turned in his arms to face him. He looked at me, his eyes clear and calm, the confusion replaced by a quiet certainty. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, gentle kiss that tasted of sleep and the promise of a new day. It was a kiss that said, "This is us now. This is our morning. This is real." There was no fear in it, only a deep, abiding tenderness. Our life together began to find its own rhythm. It was a quiet, gentle thing. It was in the way he'd bring me a new roll of my favorite film just because he saw it in a shop. It was in the way I'd leave a plate of food for him in the oven when I knew he was working late. It was in the shared smiles across a room, the easy way we navigated our small kitchen, our bodies moving around each other in a familiar dance. My camera, which had once been my shield, became a tool of love. I still took pictures of him, but they were different now. They weren't stolen moments of a lonely man. They were portraits of his laughter, of the peaceful way he slept with his head on my chest, of the soft afternoon light catching the warmth in his eyes as he looked at me. I was no longer just an observer of his life. I was a part of it, and he was a part of mine. One evening, months later, I was in the living room, sorting through contact sheets. He came and sat on the floor next to me, leaning his head against my leg as he watched me work. He picked up a photo I'd taken years ago, back at the university pool. It was a shot of him just after a race, leaning against the lane line, water streaming down his face, his eyes closed in a moment of pure, solitary exhaustion. "I remember that day," he said quietly. "I just lost a big race. I felt like I'd let everyone down. I felt so completely alone." He looked from the photograph up to me, his gaze soft and full of a history that was now ours. "You saw it, didn't you? Even back then. You saw that I was lonely." I nodded, my throat tight. I think I just recognized it." He put the photo down and took my hand, bringing my knuckles to his lips for a soft kiss. "You don't just see me, Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You make me feel seen." I didn't know how much I needed that until I had it. That night, as we got ready for bed, I walked into his room. He was already under the covers, reading a book. He looked up and smiled as I came in. I went over to the door, and, instead of closing it, I just left it ajar, a small crack of light showing from the hall. He raised an eyebrow. Leaving it open, I smiled and got into bed, settling into my familiar place beside him, just for old time's sake. He laughed, a low, warm sound, and put his book aside. He turned off the light, plunging the room into a comfortable darkness. He rolled over, pulling me into our familiar embrace, his body a warm, solid presence against mine. There was no more uncertainty, no more fear. There was just the steady beat of his heart against my back, a rhythm that had become as familiar and necessary as my own. The open door was no longer an invitation into a room. It had been an invitation into a life. And somewhere along the way, without either of us planning it, we had built a new room together, a space defined not by walls or doors, but by the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create, a silence that was finally, completely, filled with peace. We had found our way home, not by following a map, but by getting lost together. And in that shared, gentle darkness, we began to heal.